Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war, Iran war, global geopolitical update. I have a toddler banging on a door right next to me, if you could hear that, and getting rather excited because she could see me. I'll have to say hello to her a little bit later. Thank you very much for being in here. I've got quite a fair bit to talk to you about. Won't get through it all. I'll cut this earlier than I normally would, he says, famous last words. But so much going on at the moment. I want to do a separate video on the Irish Taoiseach who was speaking to Trump in the Oval Office yesterday. I think there was a really interesting interaction where he defended Starmer to Trump's face, where he kind of corrected Trump on Starmer, and also, stood up for some really interesting principles, including Ukraine, the EU, migration, all sorts of things. But he did it in a way that Trump, I don't think, could get angry with. Did it in a nice sort of Irish way. Not one of those leaders or countries that Trump wants to pick a fight with, really. I don't think he'd get much out of that. So that was a really fascinating interaction. But I'll save that for a separate video. If you haven't seen some of the interactions between Trump and the Irish leader, it's well worth looking at. I also am going to do a separate video on Brexit and well, not Brexit, the opposite to Brexit, sort of rejoining. A lot of European leaders, we've had Pedro Sanchez and Alexander Stubb, and indeed the French foreign minister talked very warmly about the UK rejoining the single market. From the French foreign minister, we've got Stubb and, with arms open, he said. We've got Stubb and Pedro Sanchez being very positive about the UK rejoining, and the idea that France would be against it or other people might not be up for it is the EU's moved on, but also what would that look like, how would that go? So there's a lot of it. There's an increasing amount of conversation about the UK's relationship with the EU, which I think is incredibly important for the UK, but also for the EU. So there's a lot to talk about there, but I'll save that for another video. Before we get into the depths of talking about, we're going to start with Iran. The reason I was a few minutes late is because Tulsi Gabbard is at the moment, or all the videos are coming out of her talking about Iran and Ukraine and Russia in this congressional hearing. And so I will give you a snippet of what's going on there, but there'll be a lot more as the day emerges for me to delve into and to talk to you about. But that's absolutely fascinating. But before we get to all of that, I want to just make a statement on members of the channel. Like someone today said, you give all this respect to people who are super chatting to lives, and he felt a bit left out. And actually, it's absolutely true. I just forget too often to give kudos to the members of the channel who have supported me for years and continue to do so. And thank you for those who help to keep the lights on here. I really do tremendously appreciate it. And I was having a word to Benny Pie about what things I always want everything to be available to non-members, a bit like if I was running a newspaper, or some kind of media entity. I wouldn't, having it behind paywalls is I think, although you do have to kind of pay for media, pay for your newspapers or your cable channels or whatever. But anyway, point is that I need to do more for members. I struggle for time because I spend so much of my day doing this, but I need to support the members with content or something in a way that you guys support me. So I want to say thank you to the members very, very publicly now. You're just incredibly generous. Okay, that aside, so I'll be running things like polls and member suggestions for videos and stuff like that. These ideas I need to work out with Benny Pie and whatnot, but yes. So let's now get to Iran first. Then we're going to go to Ukraine. Viktor Orban said some just annoying things today, as is typical for him. But as ever, please remember to like, subscribe and share. I mean, that is completely free. And those of you who subscribe to the channel help out with the algorithm and help out with getting that subscriber level to 100,000, which would be absolutely marvelous. But also, it keeps you guys in the loop as well. So thank you to those who have already done so. Right, let's get on with the details. And of course, big up to the mods helping out in the live chat and everything. Thanks for being here, peeps. Right, okay. Let's talk about Tulsi Gabbard, or let's have her talk for herself, shall we? So Trump says he was shocked that Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz.
Delivered remarks.
He chose to omit the parts that contradict the president. The president continues to say as well that, you know, he had no idea, was shocked that the Iranians had moved to take over the Strait of Hormuz. Did you provide any intelligence that would say that it would be, that it was not likely that the Iranians would try to move on the strait?
I'm not aware of those remarks, and I think those of us here at the table can point to the fact that historically the Iranians have always threatened to leverage their control over
Why would the
Strait
president
of
say he was
Hormuz.
amazed?
I'm not aware of those remarks.
What about the comments the president made?
I'm not aware of those remarks is not a good enough answer, but of course, fairly typical. How come, as you are director of the national intelligence, you're in charge of like 18 different intelligence agencies, how did he not understand that Iran, or how did he not predict that Iran would close the Straits of Hormuz? Like, how did that happen? And here's another interaction, this time with Senator Ossoff from Georgia. Incredible.
This year that this quote, the White House stated on March 1st of this year that this war was launched and was, quote, a military campaign to eliminate the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, end quote. That's a statement from the White House. Quote, the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime. Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was an imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime?
The intelligence community assessed that Iran maintained the intention to rebuild and to continue to grow their nuclear enrichment capability.
Was it the...
Which is not an imminent threat, right? They can intend to. I can intend. Me as a single human, I can intend to enrich uranium to a significant enough degree to create my nuclear bombs and missiles and fire them at the United States. Okay, whoop-de-doo. Am I an imminent threat? No, I'm not. I've got absolutely no chance of doing that. I am not an imminent threat to the nation state of the United States. So Iran could be maintaining or doing whatever you say they're doing. But the question is, were they an imminent threat? Because it's the imminent threat part of it which leads to striking Iran before they can strike you, right? That's a question that you weren't answering.
Assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False.
OMG. So literally the job of Tulsi Gabbard and all of her departments is to provide the information as to whether Iran, in this case, is or isn't an imminent threat. The president can't do that. You provide him with, I mean, like, if you're relying on Donald Trump to analyze all the data to then decide himself whether Iran is an imminent threat or not, then I would say God help you, but, you know, Cosmos help you. That's not his remit. Like, he is not analyzing, synthesizing, and concluding on all the intelligence. He deals with all the reports you give him, right? But one of those reports is whether Iran is an imminent threat or not. He is not the only person that can determine whether, in fact, he should not be that person at all. That's not his expertise. He's a freaking real estate magnate. This is absolutely outrageous.
Assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False. This is the worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations. You've stated today that the intelligence community's assessment is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated and that, quote, there had been no efforts since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability.
So the nuclear enrichment capabilities have been, quote, obliterated. You had said they've been obliterated. Government said they've been obliterated, and that there was no ability to, make them again. Okay, so where's the imminent threat coming from?
There had been no efforts since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. Was it the intelligence community's assessment that nevertheless, despite this obliteration, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
It is not the intelligence community's responsibility to determine what is and is not an imminent threat.
Okay.
That is up to the
Here's the
president
problem.
based on a volume
No,
of
it is
information
precisely
that he receives.
it is precisely your responsibility to determine what constitutes a threat to the United States. This is the worldwide threats hearing, where, as you noted in your opening testimony, quote, you represent the IC's assessment of threats.
This is brilliant. I hadn't heard this, right? I just heard a little bit, read a little bit, but this is brilliant. In your opening statement, I mean, you admit that you're in charge of working out whether they're imminent threats. And she's like, it's not my responsibility to find out whether there's an imminent threat. Oh, the only person who can do that is Donald Trump. No, literally, that is your job. Literally, you have told us that is your job.
You are here to
Just unbelievable. I love it. I love it. John Ossoff's cool.
It is precisely your responsibility to determine what constitutes a threat to the United States. This is the worldwide threats hearing, where, as you noted in your opening testimony, quote, you represent the IC's assessment of threats. You are here to represent the IC's assessment of
Intelligence
threats.
community.
That's a quote from your own opening statement. And so my question is, as you're here to present the IC's assessment of threats, was it the assessment of the intelligence community that, as the White House claimed on March 1st, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
Once again, Senator, the intelligence community has provided the inputs that make up this annual threat assessment.
You won't answer the question.
It is the nature of the...
So she's just said the IC provides inputs that make up the annual threat assessment. So you are giving an assessment of the threat. Like literally, you're then saying, well, let's forget about our conclusions. We're just the people that put the data in. No, you're put the data in to then conclude. It's your threat. It's your annual threat assessment. You are assessing threats. Like the report is a threat assessment, and now you're saying there's only one person that can decide whether it's a threat assessment, assess whether it's a threat, and that's the president. No.
Imminent threat that the president has to make that determination based on a collection and volume
You're here
of
to be
information and
timely.
intelligence that he is provided with.
You're here to be timely, objective, and independent of political considerations.
Exactly what I'm doing.
No, you're evading a question because to provide a candid response to the committee would contradict a statement from the White House. Let me ask.
Brilliant. So the reason why you're not answering yes or no is because it would contradict the White House. Absolutely spot on there from John Ossoff. I love that. Excellent. As Travis Akers here says, the fact that DNI Tulsi Gabbard does not believe it is the intelligence community's responsibility to determine if a threat is imminent is disqualifying for her to be the National Intelligence Director. That is one among many of the primary responsibilities of the intelligence community. This should be insanely embarrassing. This should be, like I always say, front page news, right? But it'll be lost in all the maelstrom of chaos that's going on at the moment. So DNI Gabbard's prepared written remarks say that, quote, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated in June. She tells Congress that there have been no efforts since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. She says the entrances to the underground facilities that were bombed have been buried and shuttered with cement. Quote, we continue to monitor for the early indicators on what position the current or any new leadership in Iran will take with regard to authorizing a nuclear weapons program. She did not, though, say those phrases on camera. So what she did, by all accounts, from what I've read, is that she had a written statement, but then she left out a really key part of it that would obviously show that there's no threat, no imminent threat to the United States. She didn't read that paragraph. Then she was called out on why you didn't read that paragraph. She said, oh, it's worried about time. It's like, really? Okay. Michael Weiss here from CBS News. President Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff said that Iran claimed it had enough enriched uranium to make 11 nuclear bombs before the US and Israel launched an attack on the country over the weekend. So now we have a situation where Tulsi Gabbard, as the DNI with a threat assessment, says that there was no chance of nuclear threat from Iran, that there was no imminent threat. And you've got Steve Witkoff in his eminent geniusness of real estate magnate and golfing buddy of Trump, saying that, oh, they had enough stuff to make 11 nuclear missiles. Okay, right. So numbnut over here is in direct contradiction of the intelligence community and numbnut over there. Right, gotcha. Then we've got sensible person Mark Kelly here speaking with, with Tulsi Gabbard. Go for it.
That brings us to the war with Iran. So this has created one of the largest ever supply shocks to the global oil supply, which has sent gas prices skyrocketing for Americans. But not everybody is losing. Directors Gabbard and Ratcliffe, is it accurate that Russia has gained billions of dollars in additional oil revenue due to price spikes as a result of the war and loosened sanctions? Director Gabbard.
That is what has been reported. I'd defer to the Director of Secretary of Treasury and Energy on that front for details.
Director Ratcliffe.
Yeah, I'm not an economist, not going to try and do those calculations. But as I talked about earlier, sometimes there are decisions made that will benefit adversaries at the same time policymakers think that it will benefit the American people.
It's clear, I think we'd all agree that sanctions were loosened, and that means more money into the coffers of Vladimir Putin. That brings us...
And that is a very good point. So Mark Kelly bringing that up nicely there. Okay, so on the Strait of Hormuz, we've gone from... Well, first of all, let's read Donald Trump, one of his latest... from today, one of his latest Truth Social posts. I wonder, this is, remember, after the whole NATO aren't doing anything, I'm thinking about giving up on NATO. They don't do anything for us. We spend trillions on NATO without understanding how NATO works and what the funding is for, which is your own defense. He said, I wonder what would happen if we, he's just asking questions. I wonder what would happen if we finished off what's left of the Iranian terror state and let the countries that use it, we don't, be responsible for the so-called strait. That would get some of our non-responsive allies in gear and fast. So he's playing around with the idea of just walking away and letting everyone else pick up the pieces because they're the ones that use the oil. Now, he said about the UK as well. It's like, hang on, we don't use that much oil that comes through the Strait of Hormuz. Most of it goes to like China and India. But the problem is, yet again, Donald, you don't understand that it goes onto the global market, which affects your prices. So you might not think that you directly, because you don't directly consume oil that comes through the Straits of Hormuz. But what you do is you consume oil that goes onto the global marketplace. And that includes the oil that you drill from inside the United States of America, because you have a free market. Now, unless you are going to price control, and one of those things that you claim socialist countries do and you don't like doing it, blah, 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 but you keep doing things that make it look a little bit like you want to be that kind of leader, unless you're going to go down that route, your chevrons and your Exxon Mobils will drill oil and gas from the United States territory, and that will be on the open market. So you can say that you produce more gas and oil than anyone else, and it's okay. We have our own stuff. Why are we bothering fighting for you guys over there? You're doing that because that goes on a global market, and so does your stuff. And so therefore, whatever happens over there will affect your oil consumption and the prices and inflation. Now, surely you understand that, but it's looking like, yet again, just like with NATO, you don't understand that. It's nuts. You know, as Vigo says, Europe gets approximately 5% of its oil and 6.5% of its LNG through the Strait of Hormuz. Most of the LNG in Europe comes from the US, right? We did get our gas from Russia, largely turned that off. Let's get it from the United States. But that's the open market, right? If the LNG exporters can get a better price for that LNG in China because they're so desperate for it because they couldn't get it through the Straits of Hormuz, then they'll sell it to China at a higher price. So then we have to bid higher, and that's how the free market works. It's on the international market. We understand this. You and I understand this. But, you know, numbnuts in chief here doesn't. On the Strait of Hormuz, we've gone from don't need help to we need help to why aren't you folks helping to help's on the way to not telling you who's helping to help's not actually on the way, but we don't need it anyway to we may just abandon it and leave it to everyone else. That's a pretty accurate synopsis of what's going on, as Who's Poppin' rightfully says. That is indeed the art of the deal. Right. So that is where Trump's at the moment. Now, on that help, let's have here Senator, is it Sheehy, a Republican, just slagging off British Royal Navy.
Are you surprised the Europeans are dragging their feet or not really?
I wouldn't say I'm surprised, but I'm very disappointed. In fact, I met with some of our European ambassadors today and expressed my displeasure, saying this is absolutely ridiculous that the entire global economy, the free world's economy, has been built on the back of the American Navy for the last 75 years. Free international trade along our world's oceans is...
I mean, that's demonstrably incorrect. There's an international navy operating around the Red Sea to stop Somali pirates. I mean, it's just not true. It's the whole American exceptionalism here of like, we do everything for you. We literally do everything for the rest of the world and you guys do nothing. And this is how you thank us. And it's like, actually, it's not how it works. We work in alliances and we work together because we're stronger together. But here he's like, we do everything. You don't thank us. And the Royal Navy's a piece of shit. Is essentially what he's just about to say.
Free international trade along our world's oceans is literally carried on the back of our Navy and our Navy alone. And now when we have to open one of the world's most vital seaways because a terrorist barbarian regime is closing it down, they're nowhere to be found. It's unacceptable and they should be showing up for the fight. I shouldn't say I'm surprised or not, but I'm very disappointed.
But which they are dependent on, much more so than we are.
So we are dependent on the oil and gas. As Viggo Holmson's just pointed out, no, we're not dependent on the oil and gas from the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, again, this is so frustrating that, like, Laura Ingraham is wrong, he is wrong, and they just sit there and be a couple of wrong-uns delivering wrongness to all their audience. And there's no one on there saying, I think you're fine. Sorry, but I think you'll find you are technically and empirically and totally and utterly wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. The Royal Navy used to be a great force for good in the world. Now they're a rust bucket. It's unfortunate.
Brilliant. Now we're a rust bucket. Thanks for that, mate. Now, I would agree our Royal Navy is massively underfunded. We're trying to get on top of that at the moment. There's a load of shipbuilding going on at the moment. 2030 is going to be a much better time for the Royal Navy thereafter. But like to have one of our supposed greatest allies or close allies or this nation involved in the special relationship just say, well, the Royal Navy is a rust bucket. Well, thank you very much, mate.
Truth. They should be showing...
I mean, where are your mine hunters, by the way, mate? Where are your mine hunters?
...up to support this because they have just as much interest in this fight as we do.
Oh, I think they have more because they're more dependent on the Middle East oil than we are. We except for California's crazy.
Where's she saying that? Where's she getting it? Were there more... I mean, essentially, negligibly, yes, because we have a tiny bit that comes from the Middle East and you guys probably don't have any. I wonder if anyone's got any information on how much oil and gas comes from the Middle East to the United States. but it's not the degree that you think it is.
Craziness. We're going to get into that at the end of the show. I mean, we don't need their oil, but this is obviously has reverberations for the global economy. Senator, it's always great to see you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah, this is our big problem, as Rakundog points out. No point building ships if no one will join the Navy, and that is a huge issue. I think that's a problem with the United States. Actually, recruitment has traditionally been declining, and across Europe as well. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, that is someone giving his opinion on national TV. Here's another person giving their opinion on Newsmax. This is Caroline Levitt, the White House press spokesperson, talking about, again, rationale for the war, right, in Iran.
I'll ask one other question, leave that to others, which is very simply, can the president declare this war effort a success?
So the question, because you won't have heard that very easy, can the president declare this war effort a success?
The U.S. does not retrieve Iran's nuclear fuel.
If the US does not retrieve Iran's nuclear fuel.
Look, that's something the president has refused to comment on. It's an option on the table for him, but I'm not going to comment on it or take it off the table. We've defined the objectives of Operation Epic Fury very clearly, which is, of course, to wipe out Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, which we have been very successful.
So she said, our objectives, we set them out very clearly. And by the way, you haven't, because everyone said something different. But now the objectives isn't just wiping out their military. It's very specific. She says is wiping out their ballistics. Now, their ballistic missiles, correct me if I'm wrong, but their ballistic missiles can't reach the United States. So if you're talking about an imminent threat from Iran, ballistic missiles, the Iranian ballistic missiles, they're not intercontinental ballistic missiles. These are missiles that are not an imminent threat to the United States.
Successful in doing. We've achieved dominance over the skies of Iran to annihilate their navy, which we have done. According to CENTCOM this morning, I received the updated number.
So one of the objectives is now to annihilate their navy.
More than 120 naval vessels are at the bottom of the sea because of our United States Armed Forces.
Actually, H.I. Sutton's just done a satellite analysis to show a whole bunch of them are not at the bottom of the sea. They're damaged, but they're still afloat. So just thought I'd throw that one in there. Not maybe an unnecessary distinction.
Great thing for the American people. That's a great thing for our allies in the region, and of course to ensure that yes, Iran cannot permanently cannot possess a nuclear weapon is something this president has long said for decades. But I'm not going to forecast or remove any future options off the table.
Still have the ability to produce a nuclear weapon or no?
Look, again, we're in a place right now where we're ensuring that Iran can no longer threaten the United States of America, and the United States military is doing a tremendous job at it.
So it's really important because this is full circle now. She's talking about the threats that they pose to the United States, where the DNI has Tulsi Gabbard has just effectively told us there are no threats, but then when questioned explicitly said, I can't decide whether there are threats. That's up to the president, even though that literally is my job.
At achieving these objectives.
So that's Caroline Levitt, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, then when they're talking about, well, when they're whinging the Trump administration about the Straits of Hormuz being closed, they're whinging about that because why is that a problem? Because it affects predominantly oil and gas transit, and then fertilizer transit, and then other things. But those are the main things. In other words, what the United States rightfully and correctly doesn't want is inflation, and they don't want there to be a constraint on the production and shipments, exports of oil and gas, right? Because that goes onto the global marketplace, and then eventually it's gonna hurt the United States because the global energy marketplace and inflation, right? So this is rather weird. We hear today that Israel, with the help of the United States, as far as I understand it, is now attacking Iranian oil facilities in southern Iran. We now understand that this is supposedly Iran's South Pars field. I believe this is a gas field, is now massively on fire in the Bushehr province. And apparently the Americans, correct me if I'm wrong, have been involved in these strikes. So I don't understand how on the one hand, I mean, for this being an ideological war, Israel, it kind of makes a bit of sense. We just want to screw you over. Don't really care how much this costs for the world in terms of hydrocarbons. But for the United States and all other nations in the world, this hurts, right? So I don't understand how they are at least complicit in the destruction of these oil and gas fields when at the same time they're moaning about the Straits of Hormuz being closed, which impacts the distribution of oil and gas. Now, I know a lot of that will come from other Gulf nations, but actually restricting Iranian oil from the marketplace does functionally the same thing. You know, if you're worried about a lack of oil and gas getting to the global marketplace because of the closing of the Straits of Hormuz, then you are equally as worried about a lack of oil and gas making it to the global marketplace because you've blown up the oil and gas fields in Iran. So I don't know. There are some claims, as Anodyne says here, a US official denied that the country attacked gas fields in Iran, instead saying it was carried out by Israel. So, but then if you are supporting it, if that's the case, then he should, like, I've read that actually the US was complicit in those, but if the US wasn't complicit in those attacks, then there should be all sorts of anger directed at Israel. Like, the public dismay at other nations not helping to clear the Straits of Hormuz should be equally matched. It should be matched with anger towards Israel for doing that, because they functionally have the same thing. Like, if you're complaining that we're not helping you open the Straits of Hormuz, that's because we're not helping you get oil and gas on the global marketplace. So if your mates in Israel are bombing the crap out of these fields, then that functionally has the same outcome. And you should be as equally angry with Benjamin Netanyahu as you are with Starmer and Macron and all these other nations. I mean, the double standards is absolutely outrageous here, and hopefully that is evident. Right, this is claimed as an Iranian attack on Riyadh in Saudi Arabia here. And I think there are other, oh no, I don't. There are other explosions that I've seen as well. So it's clear that Iran is still able to mount some kind of threat to the Gulf nations around them. That's worth remembering, that they haven't yet exhausted their own supplies of weapons and their ability to fire at least some of those weapons. Right, moving on. So Friedrich Merz on Iran has said, Washington did not consult us and did not declare Europe aid to be necessary. We would have advised against following this path in the way it is currently being followed, he says. So that is, again, another criticism of the lack of clarity and the lack of sharing of communication over what has taken place. Okay. Then we have here, this is Pete Sessions, Representative Pete Sessions on CNN. Let's see what he has to say.
Iran. The president is moving about 2,500 Marines to the region. Are you okay with putting those troops on the ground?
So the question, are you okay with 2,500 American boots on the ground? His answer, fantastic. Lee Bad.
I actually spoke to some media last night, and I indicated that I believe that what these 2,500 Marines of the Marine Expeditionary Force would be to probably secure the island. The island is not, in my opinion, boots on the ground.
The island is not boots on the ground. The island is made out of gas, water. It's a water island in an ocean or a sea of water. It's not ground. What about boots on Greenland? I mean, that's an island. If you had war on Greenland, technically, every landmass on Earth is an island. It's just a matter of size. At some point, we go, it's not an island now. That's a whole continent. Well, that's too big to be an island. But essentially, North and South America, the Americas together, is a big island, right? Greenland is a really big island. Australia. But apparently, if you land any troops on any of these places, anywhere on Earth, it's not boots on the ground because it's an island. So if the Americans land troops in Karg Island, it's an island, so it's not boots on the ground. I think have I had a frontal lobotomy without realizing it? Have I fallen through some kind of Stargate portal and ended up in some weird place where I'm being gaslighted to the max by numbnuts?
In
How
combat
so?
circumstances.
It is a territory. It is
secure
Iran.
the facility. Well, I'm not going to argue that point. As a matter of fact, you're right. But what I would
that's
say
nice.
is the president's chosen.
So right, okay, you are right. It is made of ground. Sorry, because before I just forgot reality, but now I've remembered. It turns out islands are made of ground.
Not to obliterate the ability that to get oil, and I think he wants to go secure that to make sure the Iranians don't do themselves in. So I think it's probably wisdom. Is that boots on the ground? No, not like inside Iran where they're in the cities.
Right, okay. So boots on the ground, you can't be in a forest, you can't be in a savannah, in a desert. Not like, so Iraq wasn't boots on the ground. You have to be in cities. Only when they got to Fallujah and places was that. Now it's boots on the ground. So when there are cities, right. But if it's an island or anything that's not city, then okay. Right, good point. Well made.
We go through circumstances that we've had in the past of large areas of population, combatants against us, and it is a mess. I am against what I call the mess, moving people, Marines, snipers into population areas. But
so, as Vigo correctly points out, boots on the ground, most US operations in the Pacific during World War II were on islands. Tell those they never put boots on the ground. Yes, very well said there. Okay, so we've got this idea about Trump betraying people. So the idea that he's going to be supporting the people of Iran. Trump betrayed his wives. He betrayed the Afghans. He betrayed the Ukrainians. He betrayed the Kurds. He betrayed the Venezuelans. He continues to betray America and our allies. So, of course, he will betray the people of Iran. Here's the important point, though. The only people he never betrays are the Russians. That's a pretty good point. Another voice here that's worth listening to. This is an interview with Christiana Amanpour. I forget the name of this lady, but anyway, here's her expertise.
He has no one with him, actually, who does remotely understand the Iranian mindset. And when you think about sort of his war group, I mean, he's got Pete Hegseth, the Fox News host. You know, he's got the very excellent General Kane, who's, you know, a logistics man, and a very good one too, but he's logistics, as he says, you know, don't ask me, I don't do policy. He doesn't. You know, he's got a guy who builds shopping malls in New Jersey, which is, you know, Steve Witkoff. You know, I mean, these are his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Tell me amongst that group who really understands anything about the Iranian mindset. Well, they don't.
You know what? You put a very interesting finger on this issue because, you know, even if you didn't want to criticize those people, you just have to look at the end result. And so far, it's 180 degrees different to what they expected. And you mentioned Steve Witkoff. I am still stuck in the shock of what he told.
This is worth listening to. What he said. It goes back to, you know, the whole basis for this war.
Told Fox News a few days before the war began, which is President Trump is frustrated that the amount of military assets we've sent to the Gulf have not caused the Iranians to capitulate. He literally used those two words: frustrated about non-capitulation. Anybody could have told him. Anybody. Just look back a few years, look back to the Iran-Iraq war. This theocratic ideological regime in Iran does not capitulate, and they would rather go down fighting than capitulating. So there and then, as you're meant to be negotiating to avoid this war, they don't get it. And I was absolutely stunned also by what you're saying. He doesn't have the right people around him because, as you know, they went in and eviscerated the State Department, the National Security Council, the think tanks, all these intellectuals who may or may not know a little bit more about the Middle East for decades are gone.
So that kind of Doge and purging, so a mixture of Doge and ideological purging from people like Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and all the people that went into their departments, purge all these experts. That includes, by the way, energy experts. So it turns out Doge got rid of loads of energy experts. They've got rid of Pete Hegseth got rid of a bunch of Iran and Middle East experts just before they decided to go into this conflict over, what was it over? I can't remember now, but that was just relatively recent. It's just an absolute, it's a bit of a joke. Now, what's really interesting is, and this is a real insight into the cult of personality in the MAGA side of the Republican Party, because before the war in Iran started, the concept of a war in Iran, the hypothetical, was deeply, deeply unpopular. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson and the whole America First approach saw foreign wars as anathema, as like, we've been reacting against this. Trump got elected partly because he was promising not to be someone who advocated for forever wars. But it turns out that now, just a few weeks later, those MAGA people, by and large, are massively in support of the war. So it's nothing to do with ideology. It's all to do with who is delivering whatever it is. And in this case, it's Trump. It is all about Trump. This is a cult of personality. He is, in my opinion, a deified figure in the political landscape of the United States. Harry Enton from CNN points this out. It's pretty incredible.
Okay, MAGA GOP on the U.S. military action in Iran. Look at this. Nearly 9 in 10, 89% approve of the U.S. military action in Iran. That is the MAGA GOP base. Just 9% disapprove of it. This is tremendously popular among the Republican base. And of course, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, overseeing the effort. It seems to me that a lot of people are taking that into account, including President Donald Trump, who has been smiling an awful lot at Marco Rubio lately.
Now, the important point here, as Rachel Bidikofer states, the important point here is the jump, and that is 60 points in 10 days. 60-point shift in 10 days. Partly that's going to be just Donald Trump. Partly probably the US flexing and blowing stuff up, and that looking quite successful. So you're like, oh, maybe it's not a bad idea after all. We are absolutely eviscerating the Iranian military hardware here. So I'm all for it. I've actually changed my mind. Before I thought it was a bad idea, but now I can see we're blowing up loads of stuff. It's a good idea. Or Donald Trump has decided it, that he's doing it. I mean, before, when he wasn't doing it, is bad, but now he's doing it. It has to be good because Trump is doing it. And like I've said to you before, this is just like theology. So when you have an what I would call in my books, I call it an omni-God. So again, this is nothing to do with the truth of like religion or anything or religious claims, but think about the logic going on here. So when you have an omni-God, you have a God that you believe is omniscient, which is all-knowing, omnipotent, all-powerful, and omnibenevolent, which is all-loving. You can throw in things like omnipresent as well, but those three ideals mean that in the end, whatever your God does, whatever God you might believe in, whatever your God does, because if you adhere to these three tenets of classical theism, if you agree that God is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-loving, therefore can do no wrong. If God is all omnibenevolent, he can do no wrong. So therefore, anything that God does is automatically good, right? No matter whether it involves, dashing of heads on rocks and the Amalekites being massacred or whatever. It has to be good by definition. And I use that just an example to show you, this is why I talk about the deification of Trump, because he is being treated like a god. he can do no wrong. So if I'm dead against the war, oh, Trump has decided to do it. Well, I can't be against Trump. Therefore, what Trump has done has to be good. 89% of people now approve, where before it was 29% of people, right? That is how the system is working here. And I really think that can give you a sense of how much of a deified figure, of a godified figure that Donald Trump is to his most fervent followers. Now, I'm not going to go through this. This is 5 minutes of Keir Starmer sitting and answering questions in a kind of podcast style in somewhere in the Houses of Parliament. I'm only including this because I think, although it's probably a bit staid, but this is what I was listening. What was I listening to the other day? I think it was Pod Save America yesterday, where they're doing an analysis of what they think likely to happen in the political landscape of the US, given, say, a Democrat president next time round. And what Trump has shown you is you have to be on TV all the time. Now, it's probably not going to copying exactly what Trump does, but there needs to be some understanding that if you suddenly went back to being an old school president, then actually people will be disappointed because they're so used to seeing Trump just all over the place, right? He needs to be on every single, TV screen. And Trump knows that, right? He is everywhere. I've talked to you previously about what's called the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is how advertising works. It's merely exposing people to something increases its credibility and its attractiveness. So that Trump or Farage or anyone are constantly on TV is absolutely plays to their popularity. That is why they're popular, which is why people are getting annoyed, say in the UK with the BBC keeping on platforming reform, is that actually that, through the mere exposure effect, acts as an amplifier and an advert for reform, right? And if they get an over-representative amount of airtime, then that is unfair to these other parties that aren't afforded that. Right. So, and you get that extra airtime if you say controversial things, right? You're always on the TV. And then partly you become more popular and attractive, but also those controversial ideas get normalized and they themselves become more attractive. That normalization. And so it's really important. Anyway, they were saying, whoever is it, and this is just a lesson, I think, in politics these days, that if I was in charge of the government in the UK or any country right now, I'd be like, we need to control social media. You need to be on social media all the time. Here's an example of this. Is it well done? I don't know. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't watched it all, but actually the principle of it's fine. And the questions and answers are fine. Like what he says here is absolutely fine from what I've heard. I've listened to a couple of minutes of this. But it doesn't surprise me that you're suddenly seeing Keir Starmer doing something like this.
At the beginning of this conflict, I made it really clear that we wouldn't join the offensive strikes that the US and Israel were carrying out on Iran. We've got about 300,000 British nationals in the Gulf region, and it's important that we protect them and our Gulf allies. So we have got the RAF in particular flying aeroplanes across the region. They're actually intercepting strikes to stop them hitting people and buildings. So that's defensive action, but we're not joining the war.
So just concentrate on a little thing. So what you've got here is quite a high production value, as in a good HD camera. You've got several views coming on, several points of view, several camera angles, and it's flashing around, and the questions are flashing up. I mean, this with Keir in the corner there. I mean, this is quite a sensible thing, and it's just taken them a long time to get around to doing stuff like this. But I advocate for stuff like this. You have to be on TV, and the present government in the UK just doesn't spend enough time, or they don't have enough chance, oftentimes, but they don't spend enough time forcing their narrative or just explaining things to the public. So the public's left kind of going, what's going on here? And then the answer to what's going on here is given then by Reform, who are platformed, or the opposition, who are like, well, this is rubbish, this is rubbish, this is rubbish. And they don't get enough time. And this is not like being pro-Labour. I'm talking just in generalities here. Like the government, whoever the government is, needs to make sure that they have enough airtime to be explaining as clearly as possible the principles of their policies. right? And that you've got Keir Starmer for 5 minutes on Twitter, wherever this was originally hosted, I think is completely understandable, and I'm amazed it's taken so long. Anyway, I just thought that was quite interesting, and actually what he says is all pretty right there. As far as what the UK's position with regard to Iran is. Okay, so this has been a little bit controversial. On Monday, Trump said he spoke to a former president about bombing Iran. And said that actually I spoke to this former president. I'm paraphrasing his words here. Obviously, he said I spoke to a former president, and he was well up for us bombing Iran. He said, "Yeah, I agree with what you're doing there." This has been seen as somewhat controversial because this has been denied by every single former president. There's only 4 of them alive. George W. Bush, an aide for him, says they haven't been in touch. An aide to Bill Clinton says that whoever Trump was referring to was not Clinton. An aide to Obama says no recent conversations have taken place between Obama and Trump. And a source familiar with the matter said the former President Trump was referring to was not Joe Biden. In other words, Trump wasn't, okay, so if it wasn't Biden, it's one of the other 3, and the other 3 are like, well, it wasn't us. We haven't said that. You haven't spoken to us. And so this has been seen as controversial because it's either Trump just outright lying about people, and he's done this before. So he did this with Gavin Newsom, for example, who was detailing a phone conversation he had with Trump. And he said it was quite a nice conversation as it was, and we were talking about this, talking about that. Then Trump came out on social media and said that we had this conversation about something else that we didn't even talk about, and he essentially lied about the conversation. In other words, Trump has got form for lying about that. Right, I've already talked you through this article, but it's fascinating, from Jonathan Powell, who's the National Security Advisor for the UK. He took a team with him, went with Steve Witkoff, who didn't take a team of experts with him, but relied on Rafael Grossi, the International Atomic Energy Agency head, when they were doing the negotiations with Iran. So Witkoff didn't have a team of experts, didn't understand it himself, and apparently came away and didn't understand much of what was discussed, partly because Witkoff and Kushner are seen as agents of Israel. Literally, that's why Jonathan Powell and a team of experts were there to make sure that nothing crazy happened. In the end, so from this, it's a fascinating article, but from this, Powell and a team were like, oh wow, Iran have actually presented something that's quite, quote, surprising. This was a good thing. We need to tweak it a little bit, but we're going to have another set of meetings to see what they come back with next. But this is good. We don't see them as an imminent threat, and they're also conceding loads here. So it's looking like we're going to get a really good deal with Iran. Witkoff went away, and Kushner went away, and the next thing you know, they're bombing Iran. And we weren't obviously kept in the loop. But Jonathan Powell's like, no imminent threat, and they were going to do a deal. In other words, the justification for the war is even less robust. And it just looks like Trump doing what Israel wanted to do. And we're back to this whole thing about this was all down to the nation of Israel, and then other actors, maybe like Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and Stephen Miller, people who are, Jewish or aligned to Israel's desires and objectives. So, yeah, interesting. Now, this is apparently not a photoshopped image coming from a fuel pump, a gas station, petrol station in Japan. It says, "I'm sorry, out of gasoline because of Trump." Right, and why this is interesting is because he is getting the blame internationally for this in a way that maybe he's not across the board in the US, because actually, as you've seen, 89% of the GOP is still massively in support of what he's doing. And then you've got Kevin Hassett, one of his dutiful spokespeople that comes out and has to fight fire with whatever. John Favreau from Pod Save America says, get this guy on the campaign trail. What he says here is outrageous.
But the fact is that the U.S. economy is fundamentally sound, and the
U.S. economy is fundamentally sound.
If it were to be extended, it wouldn't really disrupt the U.S. economy very much at all. It would.
If the blocking of the Straits of Hormuz was to be extended, it wouldn't really affect the U.S. economy at all. Really? So all of that hydrocarbon doesn't go on the international market. Okay.
It would hurt consumers, and we'd have to think about if that continued, what we would have.
Hang on. And then he says it would hurt consumers. What? So it wouldn't hurt the economy, but it would hurt consumers.
Hurt consumers, and we'd have to think about.
Sorry, I need to take it back a little bit.
It wouldn't really disrupt the U.S. economy very.
It wouldn't really disrupt the U.S. economy very much.
At all. It
at all.
would hurt consumers, and we'd have to.
It would. So that's right. It would hurt consumers. Hang on. It wouldn't hurt the economy, but it would hurt consumers. Not really worried about that. You what?
Think about, if that continued, what we would have to do about that. But that's like really the last of our concerns right now because.
What? If that continued, we'd have to think about that, but that's the last of our concerns right now. Kevin Hassett has just said on camera that the consumers of the United States of America are the last of our concerns right now, as the price of oil has shot up to $106.77, as Christopher tells us here, as Evan tells us there. But he's like, that's the last of our concerns. The consumer is the last of our concerns. Wow. And that's why John Favreau's like, get this guy on a campaign trail. This is going to win all the votes. You consumers out there, you're the last of our concerns. What we really are concerned about is some unknown objective to do with the Iran situation that's kind of in flux at the moment. Some people say it's nukes. Some people say it's energy. Some people say it's ballistic missiles. Some people say it's regime change. Who knows? But it's certainly not the consumer getting cheap goods. That's definitely not what we're concerned with.
What we would have to do about that. But that's like really the last of our concerns right now because we're very confident that this thing is going ahead of schedule.
Okay.
But the fact is.
Anyway, there you go. Right. Now, talking about energy, and sorry, the sound on some of these isn't quite as loud as it should be. That's why I'm repeating what they're saying. Now we've got, here is a snippet from the Taoiseach speaking to Trump, but Trump here talking about, I think, energy.
See, why are they buying oil from Norway? But they have windmills all over.
Oh, that's it. He's slagging off the UK. So here he's having a pop at the UK, and he's saying they're buying oil from Norway while they're building windmills. Why they got windmills all over the place?
See, why are they buying oil from Norway? But they have windmills all over the country, destroying those gorgeous Scottish fields and those beautiful fields all over the windmills, which don't work. They're tremendously expensive.
They do work, and they're cheaper than the hydrocarbons. Like, honestly, he's like 100% wrong here. And just, it annoys me because he gets to lie on camera to the international community and to his nation, and he's just lying.
And the best testament to that is the windmills are made in China, but China doesn't use them.
That's a lie as well. China uses massive amounts of their windmills, and the EU, the Europe, consumes relatively little of Chinese windmills compared to like Danish windmills, British windmills. On the Isle of Wight, they used to make wind turbines just opposite where I live. So just like, it's just everything he has said so far has been demonstrably false.
You know what China uses? Coal. They're building 58 coal-fired plants right now, and that's up to them.
I don't want to dig out, but I can easily dig out the massive amount of wind and solar that China has now got up and running. So it far outstripped you. And the fact that you are in denial of this means that you are going to be behind the curve when it comes to energy. So this is all to do with the Iran war, by the way, and I'll bring it back in a second.
But these foolish countries that are buying windmills, putting them out of business, I'm proudly telling you that we're going to try and have no windmills built in the United States during my... They're very bad. They're very bad environmentally. They kill the birds. They're unsightly. They make a lot of noise. And for some...
They're very bad environmentally. Okay, how? They kill the birds. Is that the... so just wondering whether windmills kill more birds than oil and oil slicks and oil leaks. Just wondering if that's the case, because I'm fairly sure it's probably not. And they don't work. And he said categorically, we're not going to build any windmills during my tenure.
Reason, the environmentalists love windmills, okay?
So essentially, the guy's an idiot. right? And it's just it's that simple. The guy is just an idiot. Of course, China. I mean, imagine being so effing stupid, says Karl Kulinski. You declare war on renewable energy at the exact time we have an oil crisis. And here's my point. The reason why I have included that is because you have got Israel bombing oil and gas fields. You've got the United States complaining about the Straits of Hormuz being closed because hydrocarbons can't get out. So this is the time when you need to be weaning off your reliance on hydrocarbons, because if you are going to be overly reliant on hydrocarbons, then your prices will spike whenever there's an issue in the Middle East or whenever there's war with Ukraine and Russia or whatever. Right? This is the exact time he should be saying, maybe we should think about windmills. Turns out they're cheaper than gas. But no, he's saying if they're more expensive, they don't work, they're blah, 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 they're blah, 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 and we're not going to build any of them. He's opening war on the renewables at strategically the most insane time that you can do that. Fun fact as well, most of the electricity generated in Iowa, that's Chuck Grassley's place, and South Dakota, Thune, is generated by wind turbines. And their states have among the lowest electric rates in the US. Spain, lowest energy prices in the EU as a result of 6 years of investing heavily in wind and solar. So he's demonstrably wrong, but he's also strategically stupid. The idea that we should drill, baby, drill in the UK, as the Independent newspaper points out with reference to a University of Oxford report, the idea we should drill, baby, drill is, again, just wrong. UK powered entirely on clean energy could save households £441 a year. In contrast, maximising oil and gas extraction from the North Sea would offer savings of just £16 to £82. So we can either double down on releasing as much oil and gas from the North Sea as humanly possible, but they're mature sites and they would cost us more and we wouldn't get as much return on investment. Or we can embrace this alternative, which will save us more. Well, the alternative saves us way, way more. Well, let's do the alternative then. But no, we've got to drill, baby, drill. Now, I'm going to take you on to another really interesting nugget here before we get off energy. We've got two more on energy and then that's it. Electric trucks. I've talked to you about how I love electric cars and they're the kind of the future, but also if you're going to wean yourself off hydrocarbons strategically for energy security and energy cheapness, have a look what's going on with trucks. I read it's not in any of these sources here, but there was a source I read the other day that said, watch out for electric trucks, because if you start selling loads of electric trucks, it means that the companies who are interested in profit are buying electric trucks. It means it has very little to do with woke environmentalism, and it has much more to do with being price competitive, cost competitive, and it's an economic position. What you are seeing are trucks being bought by the masses in China, electric trucks. So the growth of electric trucks in China is mind-boggling. Electric trucks incredibly reach 29% of the market in China. It will reach into 2026, I think. Or I'm not sure, that year is obviously wrong because it's in the future. In Europe, we're still at 2%. China sold 231,000 new energy-heavy vehicles in 2025, an increase of 182%. The wonderful developments in China are driven by government mandates. So there are government mandates, and by the battery swapping technology. So instead of charging your batteries, you drive your vehicle up and they just change the battery over, and then they take much longer to recharge it in whatever place it is. But it's as quick as just changing the battery. So it doesn't take half an hour to charge up or whatever. It takes 5 minutes to swap batteries. Electric trucks are also substantially cheaper to run than diesel trucks. Many electric trucks are driverless. Autonomous trucks are particularly useful in mines and at closed factory sites. If Western car makers don't wake up, then they unfortunately have good reason to be scared as hell. Now, the point here is that if you are not going to embrace new technologies, you'll be left behind. So if you have Donald Trump at the head of the United States saying, we're not going to have windmills, we're not going to have electrification of the energy network, we're going to screw electric vehicle mandates, then what happens is the rest of the world buys like 97% of the cars in in Norway, was it last year, that were bought, the new cars were electric, and they sold 12 petrol cars last month, right? If you are America and you're looking at the rest of the world electrifying, then, and you double down on old technology, then what happens is you are not going to export your vehicles. So you have no impetus, no motivation for your car and truck manufacturers to be able to compete with the international marketplace, because you don't have a domestic market for that. So you're not motivated to try and develop domestically, which means that you are going to struggle to have goods that are going to be exported, because everyone else is doing the electric trucks and the electric vehicles, and they're doing them much better than you because they're selling more of them. They're being driven by the market. This is a free market working here. And the United States will then suffer in terms of their manufacturing. And so the point of this isn't about environmentalism. It's just about stupid strategic planning, or lack of planning from the top in the United States. Another signal, there are some European markets where electric trucks are taking off right now, almost keeping up with China. So although we saw a massive disparity between percentages, in the Netherlands, 18.2% of all truck sales in 2025 were electric, Norway 17.3%, Denmark 16.9%, and Sweden 16.1%. At European average, 4.7% per this particular analysis. Point being that, you know, this is the future, whether you like it, whether you like electric vehicles, or whether you, whatever your opinions are, like, if businesses are picking this up, then it is cost effective, and it is, you want to get behind it. There's a 29 to 2% that we saw in the previous one. Anyway, I just thought that was really important, because this is a time when there's war in Iran, when you've got the opportunity to divest yourself from, you know, getting too heavily involved in hydrocarbons, and Donald Trump's doubling down in the wrong direction. And it is going to hurt. So the war in Iran will hurt the American economy. We've got inflation numbers out today of 3.4%, I think, year on year, which is worse than they thought it was going to be. Here we've got Shanaka Anselm Pereira saying, right now, in barns and equipment sheds across the American Midwest, farmers are making the most consequential decision of this war. Not generals, not senators, farmers. At $683 per ton of urea, corn economics have collapsed. So urea, fertilizers essentially. Nitrogen is the single largest input cost for corn production. At pre-war prices, a farmer could justify £180 per acre and expect a margin. At $683, the maths breaks. Soybeans fix their own nitrogen from the atmosphere through root bacteria. They do not need the molecule trapped behind the Strait of Hormuz. The seed decision is being made this week across roughly 90 million acres of American cropland. Once the planter rolls out into the field, the choice is irreversible. Corn seed in the ground stays corn. Soy seed stays soy. The acreage allocation locks in. USDA Protective Plantings reports March 31st. That report will tell the world how American agriculture responded to the Hormuz blockade. But the decisions it captures are being made now in conversations between farmers and agronomists and seed dealers who are looking at nitrogen prices and making the rational economic choice: plant the crop that does not need the input you cannot afford, so on and so forth, etc., etc. But it's going to be both inflationary, or in terms of the cost of fertilizers, or inflationary in terms of we're going to choose to make soybean, so the price of soybean might come down, but the price of corn will go up because you're not growing corn because you can't afford the fertilizers. And then supply and demand, you know, takes effect. This is the importance of, I'm not coming to that one yet. This is the importance of, oh, no, going completely in the wrong direction. This is the importance, of the Straits of Hormuz being closed and the war in Iran taking place. Then we're going to go to the inflation numbers coming out from the US, and the Fox News not reacting too positively here to these stats.
The Dow Industrials down about 16 points. Again, we are waiting on the producer price index out any second here. Cheryl Casoni with the number. Cheryl.
These numbers are much hotter than expected, guys, for February PPI. Month over month, a 0.7% jump. Street was looking for a gain of 0.3%. Year over year, we came in 3.4%. Annualized basis, the Street was looking for 2.9%. That's the reading that we got the month prior. So again, hotter than expected. We got 0.5% for core month over month. The street was looking for 0.3% to the upside. And then we came in core year over year 3.9%. The street was looking for 3.7%. There's the markets are reflecting what we're seeing here as far as these numbers. I'm going to get to the report. I'm going to see what the government is saying here about where this rise was, because it wasn't energy last month. I can tell you that from a memory. What they're saying here is, okay, so for final demand goods, we saw an increase of 1.1%, biggest rise we've seen since August of 23. 40% of that is final demand goods, 2.4%. Energy and final demand goods, less food and energy, also increased. So that's where the story is here as far as these numbers. Also, they're talking about final demand services. There was a 5.7% drop in prices for travel or accommodation services, food.
Okay, really interesting there, but I'm going to leave it there. So essentially, it's a bit confused. It's like it wasn't energy last month, if I remember, or it is energy. But it's also going to be people putting their prices up because of the tariffs, the knock-on effect of the tariffs, where the tariffs were implemented last year, but people didn't put their prices up till after Christmas. Then you're going to see that starting to come through, and we've heard the corporations saying, yeah, we're going to put our prices up. Interesting, the price reduction of travel, and that's because the latest figures, I think, are they're minus 11 million people going to the United States. I don't know what the time frame is. It's just a number that's stuck in my head from this morning. But essentially, the US, because of everything that Trump's doing, and ICE and borders and airports and people getting checked and having to have all their social media usage be surveyed for 5 years or whatever, they're not going to the United States. They're going to Canada instead, or Mexico, or wherever. And that then means that they're trying to reduce prices of going on holiday, so go on holiday in the US, so those prices will come down. But that's because they are in all sorts of trouble and they are losing out on billions of tourist dollars. At the same time, you've got inflation of everything else, including services, and that is going to be tariffs taking effect, and also energy industry too. So it's a real challenge for the Americans at the moment, and Trump's going to have to sell this to the electorate, who are generally outside of the MAGA lot. They're not going to be happy about getting involved in a foreign war, especially as it pertains to higher prices. Now, then you get this interesting situation where higher prices really badly affect the poorer people, obviously, because they can't afford it so much. So the price of bread going up as a proportion of your income affects poor people more than it does billionaires, right? That's obvious. We know that. Okay, so inflation more predominantly affects the poor people, and it turns out that they're spending less and less money on buying stuff, and that top earners account for more and more of the spending that's taking place in the United States. And look at this. So you're going from 1990 to 2000, that crossover at 2000, where the top 10% then were accounting for more consumer spending than the bottom 80%. Right, that swapped in 2000, then kind of moved around a bit in 2010, and then it started diverging, started coming back in 2020 because of COVID, and I guess giving out those checks maybe, and there's a lot more spending going on. And then since COVID, it has gone up, came down a bit, and then went up, and has been going up again. And this is slightly worrying, is that this is why you get the jobless boom. The idea that rich people are making loads of money off corporations, share prices going up because we're making huge amounts of profits, but we're not actually sharing the profits with the workers. So the workers are not getting paid anything more. Like minimum wage in the US has stayed pretty much stagnant forever. So it depends on the state though. But essentially, the workers are not getting paid more. They're not getting as many bonuses. AI are taking their jobs. And because AI has been pretty successful, apart from what happened in Amazon recently, pretty successful in doing what people used to do, they are still making those profits, but those profits aren't being shared out with the workforce. So the bottom 80% isn't doing well, but the top 10% is doing exceedingly well. And that reflects well on the stock market. Stock market is making record jumps. Yeah, whoop-de-doo, this is amazing. However, this is not good. This is not a healthy looking economy, and it's an imbalanced economy. And fewer and fewer people are going to be able to afford the stuff that they used to be able to afford. This is really, really challenging. Right, we're going to go on to. I'm probably not going to get time to go on to all my Europe stuff. We'll do a bit more on the US, and then I'll do the European stuff a bit later, or tomorrow. But I just wanted to share this with you. Pretty incredible stuff. It's to do with the new data on the democratic backsliding in the United States. So we can look at loads of data points. Here's Chris Owicki saying essentially what this shows is that all the gains in freedom in the United States since the end of the Jim Crow rules and segregation and, with human rights that have come about, they've been wiped out in a single year, and there are another 3 years to go in this presidency. So the latest data just released by the Varieties of Democracy project is that VDEM estimates that the United States, the 100-point liberal democracy index, peaked at 0.85 in 2008, slid 10 points under Trump 1.0, and recovered slightly under Joe Biden, and then plummeted to 0.57 in 2025 under Trump 2.0. In other words, when I keep complaining about the democratic backsliding in the United States at the moment, it has massively democratically backslid in the last 15 months, as in massively, right? Gandalf here says, USA falls off the democracy map. For the first time in 50 years, the US no longer appears in a list of liberal democracies. It literally isn't classed as a liberal democracy by the analysis from VDEM. Yeah. The United States, in a single year, the country has fallen from 20th to 51st place. The VDEM Institute calls it one of the most dramatic declines ever recorded. The fall does not happen in a vacuum. Brendan Carr is not among, so he's a guy in charge of the FCC, is among the most recognizable name in Trump's orbit. But the head of the federal media regulator, FCC, made waves this weekend with a direct threat to the country's broadcasters. Networks spreading what he called fake news were told they have an opportunity to correct course before their license renewals come up. The message was plain enough: fall in line or face the consequences. Staffan Lindberg, founding director of VDEM Institute, is blunt about what this means. Across so many dimensions, the retreat has been so severe that the United States can no longer be counted as a democracy. The term he uses is electoral autocracy, a system without genuine democracy that still goes through the motions of holding elections, like Putin's Russia. What concerns him the most is the assault on free speech, illustrated by the FCC chief's latest threat: an extreme concentration of power in the president's hands, a Congress that, in Lindbergh's words, has abdicated. So where is Congress? What's it doing? And Trump's use of paramilitary forces in American cities, ICE soldiers who killed 2 civilian protesters this past winter. Quote, the United States used to talk about being a global beacon for democracy and freedom. That idea has now been erased. And you hear this is also reflected in, so that same, exactly the same graph here, that's a democracy graph, is pretty much replicated in this graph, which is a crackdown on freedom of speech. So this is a US freedom of expression index ratings from 1955 to 2025. Freedom of expression has now, considering he campaigned on freedom of speech and Elon Musk said he is a free speech absolutist, Donald Trump is easily one of the worst presidents for an attack on freedom of speech, as according to the freedom of expression index. This is super, super worrying. And indeed, there's a whole article on this here in The Guardian. Trump is aiming for dictatorship. That's a verdict of the world's most credible democracy watchdog. Sweden's VDEM Institute warns that the US is no longer a liberal democracy, and autocracy is creeping across Europe too. So this is not just an American problem. We have the same issues in the UK. And in fact, there's been a warning made today. Adam Rusberg, is that his name? The former editor of The Guardian, a guy involved in the Leveson inquiry and all sorts, excellent journalist and editor indeed. He's written a piece, not for The Guardian, I don't know where he's written it, on how the GB News is a real worry in the UK, and if you're not careful about it, it's basically a mouthpiece for reform, which is a mouthpiece for a desire to become autocratic. And that's exactly kind of what we're talking about here. So there are warnings in Europe as well. This is such a challenge for democracies and from freedom of speech. Anyway, just a few more bits and pieces. So just something I thought I'd throw in. It's not apropos to anything we discussed already, but it's quite incredible. US is considering withholding HIV aid unless Zambia expands minerals access, and this transactional nature of the United States foreign policy at the moment. You saw this with the minerals deal, the exploitative minerals deal, certainly in its original iteration, that was impressed upon Ukraine by the Trump administration. Now they're saying, we won't give you HIV drugs unless you give us access, expanded access to your minerals. A draft State Department memo outlines ways the Trump administration may ratchet up pressure on the African country by ending health support on a massive scale. Wow, that sounds great. What else to go through? So this maybe this is a good place to leave it in terms of Trump. Here is a 3 times Trump voter. Not him. He's a journalist.
Trump. Let's take a listen to one more woman who we spoke with. If you could say something to President Trump and he was going to hear you right now, what would it be?
You are a worthless pile of
And you voted for him how many times?
3 times. That was my bad. Apparently, I'm an idiot.
Trump, let's take a listen.
I love that. I love that candid response there. You're a piece of S. Apparently, I'm an idiot. I voted for you 3 times. Apparently, I'm an idiot. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. What I was going to talk to you about was stuff like this, but I've been banging on for too long. I will, this will be the last one. I keep promising the last one. When asked directly whether he considers Putin an aggressor, Orban replies, no, I don't think so. From the point of view of international law, this is aggression, but the question is why we, Western countries, not Hungary, decided to change the status of Ukraine. Ukraine has been a buffer zone for decades. Then we started to accept that they wanted to join the NATO and the EU. The Russians have made it clear from the very beginning that if NATO goes to their border, taking in Ukraine, it will be a reason for war. We ignored it. So, of course, I mean, this is complete Russian propaganda, but it's also ridiculous because it means Ukraine isn't entitled to join alliances that they want to join. It's not about NATO, it's about Ukraine. And I hate this approach. The idea that Ukraine is only seen in what it is as a tool for Russia or for the EU or for NATO, rather than Ukraine standing up on its own 2 feet and saying, we want to join the EU, we want to join NATO. And if we want to do it, we shouldn't be invaded for doing so. This is absolutely outrageous from the great toad himself. It is obvious that attacking another country is aggression under international law done by the Russians, but all the crimes, etc., let's sort it out after the war. Now it's important to stop the war because Christians are dying every day. Oh, all right. So, but if they're not Christians, I'm not really bothered. What are you talking about, Orban? Ugh. Anyway. That's Viktor Orban. We'll return to that. I'll talk about that tomorrow. Right. Let's say my thank yous. And again, thank you to members who support the channel on a monthly basis. I really, really appreciate you. Those who support through PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee and Ko-fi. Thank you. Thank you. I don't thank you enough. So thank you. Niels Knudsen with 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships, talking about memberships. Thank you for your generosity, Niels. That's really, really kind. And Kevin Forst, as ever, really super generous people. I can't do this without you guys helping out. So thank you so much. Okay. As we are just going to come to an end, I'm going to remind people that we are doing a fundraiser, atpgeo.com/donate, and that will get you to this landing page, the ATP Geopolitics fundraiser that we are doing with Richard Woodruff. He's going to change that, I think, to euros or dollars, I'm not sure. So that will make a bit more sense down in the left-hand corner. And here is how you can donate. I'll probably try and do a fundraising live stream with Richard Woodruff, getting back on to talk about his experiences over there, what these drones mean for the front line and where they go and what happens. He's great to talk to, so I'm sure he'll be more than happy to come back on to do a bit of fundraising. But thank you to those who have so generously already donated. It really does make a difference. Right, that is, as I say, enough from me. Oil now has just gone up another couple of dollars there. So Evan telling us that, yeah, things are not looking good in that respect. Right. Hopefully all this made sense. We had a bit of talk about energy, and I know I'm big on renewables, but I'm trying to get across to you that renewables shouldn't be, at the moment in this context, a discussion about environmentalism, but it's actually a discussion about energy security and the cost of energy, where they are now not just comparable, but they're cheaper than hydrocarbons. So obviously it depends where you are in the world, but places like Pakistan, for example, they're going heavy on solar as a way for people to affordably get energy. So yeah, really interesting. And if you're going to double down for hydrocarbons at a time when we are involved in a global crisis that is strangling the supply of hydrocarbons, then you're an idiot. You're just an idiot. And I'm sorry, I keep saying this, but Donald Trump is an idiot. He's strategically infantile. Honestly, he's rhetorically infantile. He's strategically infantile. And I don't think he has a place being the president of the United States of America. Like, I honestly feel sorry for where the United States is going to be in 3 years' time. I really, really do. And all my wonderful American viewers, I'm so sorry that I'm consistently criticizing what the Trump regime is doing. But it is so important because the US is that important. And you have traditionally been a beacon for the world. And now I'm struggling to see you in that way. And that's due to one administration that seems to have a stranglehold on the political mechanics in the country. So the Congress appears to be unable to do anything about it. And if, by the way, I'll leave you with this, if they get the Save America Act through, this like changing the electoral voter ID and all this stuff, it will disenfranchise people of color. It is an attempt not to get more transparent, more robust elections in place. It is the only reason the Republicans are trying to force that through is so that fewer people vote Democrat. That is the reason. That is the sole reason. Voter fraud is not an issue. It is provably not an issue. And if that goes through, that is your big attempt to rescue the midterm elections from being an absolute disaster. Is to change the rules so that a whole host of people that otherwise would have voted will no longer be able to vote. Be warned. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, y'all. A final thanks to Harlequino for the super chat there. Interesting that is it still Christmas? Unless maybe that's actually what you look like. Maybe that's just a selfie. I don't know. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your support. And check out atpgeo.com/donate. Toodle pips, y'all.